Welcome to Perspectives with Asima Silva. Today we have, again, an amazing guest regarding a topic that's in our current news regarding the Palestinian issue. We have today Dr. Othman Mohammad joining us. He's a Palestinian psychiatrist, also one of the organizers and for the Boston protest for saving the Palestinians from the airstrikes and the violence that they are encountering in the recent couple of weeks. So thank you so much for joining us. We've had Dr. Slaughter on our show before, sharing his experience of working with Palestinian children, working with families who have been traumatized by experiences, especially when in Gaza. And with recent events, I really wanted to kind of highlight some more perspectives on this particular issue. And even though Dr. Slaughter himself is also, in mental health and has firsthand seen this crisis in Palestine, I would love your perspective. So first of all, thank you for joining us. And please share with us what we may not know or hear from someone else, especially since you're a Palestinian psychiatrist.
So I want to thank you for offering this great platform and for amplifying the voice of many Palestinians and allies. So my background is as a Palestinian refugee. So I grew up as a refugee in Lebanon. And Lebanon has roughly about 500,000 refugees there from Palestine. Many of them having fled post the 1948 Nakba calamity. So growing up as a refugee in Lebanon from a Palestinian heritage means a lot of things. So first of all, it means that you are stateless. So in Lebanon, we don't actually get to acquire the Lebanese citizenship.
Okay.
We are offered a refugee card. So they give us it's the sense of humor. It's a green card. It looks green. But it doesn't open a lot of doors like a U.S. green card opens. So it just denotes that you are a refugee, that even if you are born in Lebanon, because I was born in Lebanon, I didn't migrate or immigrate or leave in the Nakba, you are born in a family of Palestinians. So basically,
so it's not by birth.
Yeah, so even if you're born in Lebanon, to a Palestinian family, you get a refugee status in Lebanon.
Wow, okay.
Which opens a whole kind of conversation about what does that even mean to be born as a stateless refugee, born in Lebanon, never ever been to Palestine, and observing yourself and comparing yourself to other Lebanese people who can go to public schools, who can acquire healthcare from the government, who can get retirement funds, and who can get a lot of jobs actually that the Palestinian refugee cannot get. So that's kind of a big part of what forms the refugee identity for Palestinians in Lebanon. And so, for example, me being a physician, I'm a doctor. So I went to medical school. I studied for like 17 years to become a psychiatrist. So in Lebanon, the rules and the regulations there, the laws of the land, prohibit me from practicing medicine just because I'm a refugee there. For a lot of reasons. There is a lot of sectarianism in Lebanon, and the Lebanese people are very nice people, very welcoming people. But unfortunately, they've been torn by wars. And we had to, quote unquote, carry our cross with that Lebanese war, and our share of that was to be ostracized and to be further marginalized as a community. And many of the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon live in camps, with limited sanitation, limited education, limited access to clean water, and very, very limited resources in terms of what you can actually work to earn a living in Lebanon. So I grew up like that, and I was very fortunate that my family, when they left Palestine in 1948, my father, my grandmother, basically my uncles, my aunts, They worked really hard. And, the refugees who left in 1948 came from a lot of regions within what is now called Israel. So my family came from the city of Haifa. And the whole family learned very fast that as a refugee from Palestine, who fled, and we fled our livelihoods, our homes, our houses, you're going to have to do something else to make a living. So you have to look for jobs that are stable, that offer pension, that offer you some kind of decency. And those jobs were the jobs through the UNRWA, which is the UNRWA, which is the United Nations Refugee agency of the UN that helps refugees. So most of my family members actually became teachers in the UN, including my father. Why? Because you're working within a Palestinian fabric as his teacher there, and you would still be connected to your struggle somehow because you're teaching the Palestinian children, you're preserving the identity. At the same time, you're getting the benefits of being a teacher and maybe pension, etc. So I was very lucky that my father was a school principal with the UN, the UNRWA, and that was another way for me to connect with my identity. So at home, we'd be hearing stories about Palestinian children and students who, for example, go to UNRWA schools but have limited funds to go to universities, and then we would raise funds for them. We would hear about all the different villages of Palestine. He would say this student was from this village, from that village. So all the cities of Palestine, Yafa, Haifa, Akka, Yajur. So all these, some of them have actually completely been dispossessed and demolished now. That's how these stories became ingrained in me as a refugee growing up from Palestine in Lebanon. And some of these stories were about these students, were about our relatives, but many stories that we're told as kids are stories from Palestine. So my dad left Palestine when he was 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old, and the last memory my father has about Palestine before the war broke is that he was playing with his neighbor, and that neighbor lived close by. My dad would go to their house. They would come visit our house in Palestine, and they heard shots, and then they decided that it was not safe, so they had to flee. And the reason why this memory is important for my father and for me, and then I'm going to tell this to my daughter and all my kids, is that this was my dad's best friend, and he was a Jewish kid. And I still remember his name. His name was Avram. So Dad, my late father, who passed away a few years back, his hope was to be able to go back to Palestine and find Avram and give him a hug and say, hey, we're back, right? You've been here, and we came back. A dream that was never fulfilled or seen to fruition, because this is another struggle that we as refugees have in the diaspora. We're not allowed to go back home. Right. So Israel prevents us from going back home to our, even our neighborhoods, to see our neighbors or to see our houses. And my father, gave a detailed description for the house they had. So he told me, if you ever go back, this is how the house looks like. You go through that street and then that street, and there is a tobacco plant somewhere there, and so these stories, keep us alive, keep our identities alive, and keep the struggle alive. Because I think what is very unfortunate is that Palestinians are very misunderstood, and our voices are muffled. And in the recent onslaught on Gaza, for example, we hear the statement, Israel has the right to defend itself. But nobody talks about the Palestinians. Right. Like, what about these guys who are, getting killed? What about their voices? What rights do they have? Little, unfortunately, little rights do we have. So I'm grateful because, we get to present our stories in these programs, in this program specifically. So, I'm very grateful for this opportunity.
Well, while you were talking, I have to be honest, as you're recounting the story and you're feeling like you have a connection to Palestine, a country you've never even been to or seen, I always say switch the nouns and listen to the verbs and the adjectives. And I'm feeling like I'm listening to a family member of a Holocaust survivor. I'm feeling like, I've heard it, where I've heard, a family member, a descendant, talk about the struggles that their grandparents went through and the connection they still felt to the experiences that their parents or grandparents experienced and how they carried the pain and the shame and the guilt. So as you're speaking, I'm hearing that same sort of voice and that same sort of story. Have you gotten that feedback when you share this kind of story? Like, have people been able to kind of match the similarities between such trauma and such, at that time we call it anti-Semitism, but anti-Semitism is actually anti-Arab, right? So Palestinians and Arabs would fall under the anti-Semitism category. It is not just for, the Jews, or it's really for the Arabs and the Semites, which are essentially the same people. So have you gotten that response when you share that story of, wow, this sounds really similar to what I would be hearing from a Jewish counterpart recounting the stories of their family?
Yeah, I've actually when I was in training as a physician, you have to understand that when I migrate from the Middle East to the U.S., in Lebanon, for example, I have very limited exposure or interactions with our brothers and sisters from the Jewish faith, for example. So I got that exposure when I came to the U.S. And one of my mentors, asked me where I was from, and I told them my story. I said, I'm a refugee. I'm from Palestine, and she said, well, I have a similar story. My dad and his brothers, a couple of brothers, were the only survivors of the Holocaust. And we had to, found and find a new home for us where we can be safe. The unfortunate turn of events is that many of the survivors of the Holocaust, unfortunately, have not, and Norman, a lot of survivors talk about that. There is this feeling that if you survive that atrocity, you would know how it feels. And the Palestinians are, not alien to this pain.
Right.
So if anything, there should be some bonding over this pain, and not, a settler colonial, paradigm. But again, this is why this issue is so complex, yet it's so simple as well. It's so complex because politics complicate it. But it's also very simple because it's a human cause.
Right.
A cause of people who would long to go back to their lands, and people who are on their lands but being treated like second-class citizens, and their homes are being confiscated and demolished. So,
do you think now that people are paying more attention to this issue? The reason why I'm asking is, I've tried to, in my personal social media circle, tried to talk about this issue for the last 5-10 years. And many of the times in the last 5 to 10 years, I've, gotten pushback of, it's not as bad as you think, the stories are exaggerated, a lot of denial, a lot of people, not being able to hear such atrocities. And I think it was just too hard for them to accept that something like this can be happening in the world. Yeah. But do you feel like there's a change happening in the last few months to a year where more people are receptive of what is going on in Palestine and maybe start talking about the Palestinian perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I could feel it. In 2014, we started a media campaign to address the post-war trauma in Gaza. And the program is on YouTube. It's available. It's for free. It's called Bisalami, or Get Well Soon in Gaza. And we launched it on YouTube and and Facebook, and we had some Instagram following. And I feel that we kind of struggled to get the word out back then. Fast forward, 7 years later, we're seeing that there is a vibrant, community online. The Instagram was on fire, literally and metaphorically, during the Gaza, onslaught. And so I think that the very fact that you can actually stream live from exactly what is happening in Jerusalem, in Masjid al-Aqsa, what is happening in Sheikh Jarrah, in East Jerusalem, what is happening in Gaza, that kind of brings the picture home. There is this very poignant piece of media of this woman telling a settler that you are stealing my house. I think everyone saw that piece. And he would say, if I'm not going to steal it, someone else will steal it. So there's an acknowledgement that he's stealing someone else's house. So these media, snippets are being, streamed in real time. And I think the world is reacting a little faster because of that. And people are connecting, I think, to the struggle a little more openly. So I'm reminded, for example, that Trevor Noah, the Daily Show, talked openly about the imbalance of power and how Israel is struggling with impunity. John Oliver, as well. So this is not something that we've seen before. This is all new, and I think it is getting more attention. I'm pretty hopeful that we'll get more attention.
So do you think? It's great that people are talking about it, and I watched the Trevor Noah's comments on this issue, and I was. And he in his comments, he actually says, I know I'm going to lose followers because I'm talking about this issue. And in fact, when I started talking about this issue 5-10 years ago, I was told the same thing. You're going to lose, friends and likes on Facebook. And I kept saying, but I can't ignore it. But at the same time, we're talking like in social media and comedians. How do you think politically? Do you think we're making any progress politically, or is just the fact that we have at least one Palestinian congresswoman right now the key to maybe the step forward in making a difference politically in this country?
So I think Rashida Tlaib, the fact that she is in Congress, it means a lot of things. It just means that there is so much intersectionality happening that her voice was recognized. Not only that, she probably had a lot of opposing voices, and her voice and her allies' voices were so recognized that they were able to surmount the hurdle of their opposing voices, so she could actually get to Congress. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Corinne Bush, and other Senator Bernie Sanders, so a lot of politicians are speaking up, and I think about this not as an independent kind of phenomenon, but as a result of a growing movement, and this movement I think is getting bigger and louder, and I think we'll see more politicians speak up about this because they're a product of some intersectionality work that is getting bigger and louder, I think.
So, since you're a psychiatrist, I'm going to ask you this question. And it's almost a rhetorical question, but at the same time, I'd like you to address it in terms of our human nature. How many lives does it take for us to take this seriously? And the reason why I'm asking that question is people asked this question during the Holocaust. People must have asked this question during many of the atrocities that's happened over our humankind, lifespan and our history. We see it in Burma. We see it in China with the Uyghur people. I just am wondering, when is it? Is there like a magic number? What is it that causes us to ignore until it gets so drastic that we're talking millions? Why is it that we have to wait for 3 million people to have passed away, or 2 million people, or 6 million, or 12 million, even at the Holocaust? It's in the millions. Why do we wait for that many number? What is that magical number for people to start paying attention to? And why is it that as humans, we ignore it until it gets to that point?
Well, welcome to the human species. We are very, very complex as a human species. And we have this capacity as a human race to compartmentalize and to utilize a defense mechanism called disavowal. What you do when you disavow is you basically suspend a judgment and decide not to allow that incident or that piece of information to infiltrate to your conscious, subconscious, and to allow it to just float there for the time being. If there is structure that would allow you to do that. So, for example, think about the Holocaust. There was a structure that allowed this atrocity to happen, and that structure was the Nazi structure. It legitimized that heinous crime against humanity, and they've done what they did to our Jewish brothers and sisters. So when there's a structure like that, people find it permissible to allow themselves to disavow that piece of information and to turn sort of a blind eye to that. And that structure also exists in Palestine. And that structure is a settler colonial structure that dehumanizes the Palestinian, like the Nazis dehumanized our Jewish brothers and sisters. The structure in Israel is one that dehumanizes the Palestinians and considers them as second-class citizens or sometimes subhuman. So, for example, in the recent war on Gaza, the airplanes, the air fighters that were destroying homes and houses, literally considered children collateral damage. So Gaza is so tiny and so small. If you want to exterminate whoever, and if they live in a building, you're going to have to take down the whole building, kill the whole people. And unfortunately, that's what they've done. They've killed and depleted families. Like whole families were just erased. And the reason, again, is there's a structure that allows that, legitimizes that. And I think what we're seeing recently is that we are seeing more voices that are humanizing the Palestinians and saying, no, these are children, these are lives, and they, deserve to live, and they deserve to be treated with decency. And the fact that they're brown or they're Muslim does not legitimize that murder that is being, conducted against them.
So I remember learning about a decade ago that the amount of higher degrees in the Palestinian people per population is one of the highest when it comes to ethnicities. Why is that?
Well, I think it depends, where and when. I don't have data, but I can tell you from my perspective as a refugee in Lebanon, we left our houses and our livelihoods, so we had no wealth when we left. So there was no capital to start a business or do anything with that has to do with money or finance. So education was the way to go. So we did it defensively, but also as a people we truly value education. I remember my father. He had a certain pension from his job when he retired, and he paid 90% of it for my education. Because he felt that it's such a powerful thing to actually have a good education. And that's how we grew up, boys and girls alike. They deserve a good education. So I went to American University of Beirut in Lebanon. My sister did as well. So we truly value that at a deep level. And it was ingrained in us from a very, very tiny age.
No, I totally can relate to that. My grandfather raised me saying, things can be taken away from you, but the one thing that can't be is your mind. So you invest in your mind.
Yeah.
So yes, I see that. But I was the reason why I was asking is I was wondering if the struggles, gave some sort of motivation and some sort of a way for someone to be the best they could possibly be. The reason why I asked that is, we are in America and we live, let's be honest, a very comfy life, and we take life and luxuries for granted, many of our luxuries. And so I was wondering if, there was a connection between, the people that come from trauma and come from such, background. Do they get motivated, the next few generations where they want to be the best and they want to accomplish the best? So that was one of my reasons why I thought maybe that was a reason why the Palestinian people do have such higher degrees compared to per population.
Well, there is this concept in psychology that is called post-traumatic growth. So with trauma, you have different outcomes. You can be crushed by the trauma and just not be able to survive, or you can isolate, implode, or you can grow a thicker skin. And this is why you see people who've been traumatized, who are younger in age, when they talk to you, they sound older and wiser. And the reason is they almost had a crash course in life in a very short amount of time, where they acquired the wisdom that you would acquire in decades sometimes. So it might be that it's transgenerational. So even as a kid, I was listening to the stories about Palestine and how we were displaced and how we left our houses and livelihoods. And I learned quickly that, as a Palestinian who is a refugee in Lebanon, isolated, you can't have jobs, I have no option but to succeed and excel. This is my only option. So for me, the only option that I had is for me to go medical school and then to migrate to the U.S. And I went to Harvard, and I graduated from Harvard. Where did that come from? It came from that, realization that I only have myself. If I stayed in Lebanon, I would not have been able to practice medicine. So I only have to shoot to the stars, because the stars are the only option that I have,
right,
so to speak. Yeah.
Well, congratulations that you did achieve what you did, and I'm sure that Palestinian children seeing this and looking at you, I'm sure will find some inspiration and motivation so that you can inspire the next generation. We're almost out of time, so it's time for me to share my thoughts. I think Dr. Othman Mohammad said it the best. It's the structures. It's the structures that we need to fight against, because that's what makes us complacent and feel like we cannot, our voices may not be heard, but we cannot take that for sitting down. We need to open our voices and give a platform for those people to share their stories like we have done today. Spread the word, and remember, don't forget your humanity. That's, I think, the most important thing that we get from any of these stories is, as humans, we cannot forget our humanity. I invite you to really share this story, and please spread the word for the Palestinian people and pray for their success. So please join us again for another episode with Perspectives with Asima Silva.